Government now pushing ahead with new plans to reform state-owned entities, SOEs. The new plans have been published by the government. They include a situation where SOEs like Transnet and Eskom would be under one holding company. Government says that the government would be the only shareholder of that holding company, and the shareholder would be represented by the president. Government also says the plan would include ways to insulate the companies and their executives from political interference. You know, of course, of how SOEs have failed so badly, whether it's Transnet and the fact they can't keep trains running, or Denel, which keeps making huge losses. Do I need to remind you where most of our electricity comes from? Professor Adrian Saville is from Genera Capital. Professor Saville, good afternoon to you. It's obvious our SOEs, the model needs to be reformed. We must make major changes. Are these the right changes?
It's been great to be with you. I think that the model is one issue that you can debate here. If you look at this on paper, it makes for, I suppose, pleasing reading. It's easy on the eye. It feels very pragmatic. It feels like it will have the necessary, even more than desired, absolutely critical effects. The overarching concern that I have, and this will come as no surprise to you, or I suspect anyone who's been on the receiving end of state-owned enterprise delivery in South Africa, is the capacity to get from the ideas to the action. But, taken at face value, this resonates with one of the most highly regarded business models when it comes to state-owned enterprise, and that's the Singaporean model.
The Singaporean model seems to work. That's why it's so highly priced. Singapore's a very different country to us, a very different society, a different history in a way. Will it work here? I mean, we've seen, and we copy structures from other places. People copy our structures too. You also have to implement it, and that, I suppose, goes to your main concern about implementation.
Well, I'll give you a for instance. Do you recall when we heard about the unbundling of Eskom? Do you recall when we heard about that for the first time? Or I could give you
It was years ago.
How's that going? Or I could give you another, for instance. Let's talk about the release of spectrum. And although Telkom has come to participate as a state-owned enterprise, and others have come to participate. That process, if my memory serves, took the better part of 15 years to get that spectrum released. So there's an overarching capacity problem here that South Africa has no shortage of great policy, good ideas, and very smart people. But when it comes to getting from the paperwork to the implementation, there is this yawning deficit, and we can point to sector after sector. This doesn't really matter whether we're talking about large SOEs, mid-SOEs, or small SOEs. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the national level or the provincial level. We have a very, very big delivery problem when it comes to state-owned enterprises.
The issue of political interference and corruption, I suppose one may well lead to the other. And we saw what happened during the state capture era. Would this structure insulate SOEs, the people who run them, their boards, the CEOs, from political interference or not? And I believe the name we're looking for in this conversation is Siyabonga Gama.
It would go, it certainly goes in that direction. It has all of the construct of providing that necessary insulation, independence, a distance from political interference. Those are all important for effective state-owned enterprise operation, because I think one of the big confusions that has come into the South African structure is the confusion of government and state. State-owned enterprises do not belong to government. State-owned enterprises belong to the country. They are here for delivery of services to all parts of the population, regardless of your political orientation, and where the confusion has become profound in South Africa is that government and state have become inextricably intertwined. So by putting in place mechanisms that start to distance that or separate that, that is a absolutely necessary ingredient. Even if we were to achieve that, it remains the case that there is very high financial risk, and then there is a third element, which is the ability to operate these entities effectively. And here, the suggestion is that this restructuring will create an environment in which necessary skills are attracted from the private sector, and in which the private sector can partner and participate in a collaborative way, not a rent-seeking way.
It's, so getting the right people is one thing. Capital, obviously, is the other big thing. Is there anything about this model that would see more capital going into, for example, Transnet? Let's just put Eskom to one side if we can. Pretty big one side we would need to do that with. But with Transnet, it needs huge amounts of money to basically rebuild some of its, to buy new locomotives, to rebuild some of its railway lines. Would any of this attract more investment?
If the structures are established in a coherent way, in a way in which the risks that we've discussed briefly are not just mitigated, but actually squarely addressed, that you have an enterprise that is free from political interference, that can operate on the required terms, whether that's commercial terms or impact terms. If we've got those clearly defined parameters and a mandate that can be executed, one of the enduring features of South Africa that I think stands out as a distinct competitive advantage is our deep capital markets. There's no shortage of appetite to invest in South Africa if the circumstances are right. The circumstances have been wrong for a long time, which is why you've seen the capital pool get thinner and thinner, evidenced by gross domestic fixed investment, which sits at 15% of GDP, where the necessary requirement is 25 or 30%, and one of the greatest narrowings has been in public sector gross domestic fixed investment.
There is now clearly a window of reform opening for SOEs, and it's hard to see exactly how it will end, but there will be a big debate about it. And at some point, someone is going to try and squeeze the rather large 18-wheeler truck of privatization through this window of possible reform. Is that ever realistically, do you think, going to happen? I never thought SAA would be privatized, but it kind of almost is.
Stephen, I'd go in a sympathetic step with that observation. Yeah, your point on SAA is well made. The last time we have grandstand privatizations, you have to go all the way back to the likes of Telkom and Eskom. So those are a far distance in the rearview mirror. However, would be, I think that the lifting of the cap on generation of energy in many ways was a veiled privatization.
Professor Adrian Saville from Newzroom Capital, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. So much more to talk about when it comes to reform of SOEs.